The foundational belief of mainstream feminism rests on a belief in the historic oppression of women by a system of male dominance that confers unjust and unearned privileges on men. Its entire body of theory rests on this one presupposition, and they will protect it with everything that they have got. But the reality is that in every single metric we would use to demonstrate that blacks are disadvantaged compared to whites, and I've put a few of them up there, men fare more poorly than women, and in many of these metrics they have always fared more poorly than women. And in many of them, these gaps are much wider than the gaps between, say, blacks and whites in the US. Yet what do we hear from feminists regarding all of these inconvenient truths? They're byproducts of male privilege. Men still have all the real power within the system. Therefore, men could easily fix all of these problems if they just wanted to. And if they don't, it's on them. And that the root cause of these problems is the hatred and devaluation of women. Suicide is caused by the expectation of male stoicism, you see. Boys don't cry and all that. And why don't boys cry? Because crying is a woman thing, and women are hated and devalued in patriarchal societies. See, it's really all about misogyny. It couldn't possibly be because societies have always valued stoicism in men, because men who are stoic can better protect and provide for women and children or anything. It couldn't be that, because if that were the case, it would be very difficult to argue that women are hated or not valued by society. Male suicide couldn't possibly have anything to do with men routinely losing access to custody of their children after divorce. I mean, they do lose access, but that's misogyny too, don't you know? It's based on the assumption that women are only good for making and raising babies, even though feminist organizations fight every organized effort to change the situation. You see, it's really just misogyny. Couldn't have anything to do with negative assumptions about men as potential abusers or anything, even though those assumptions are entrenched in our laws and policies surrounding family violence at the behest of feminist organizations who wrote many of the policies and the laws. And even if those assumptions exist, it's because of patriarchy, even though feminist lobby groups have exploited these assumptions in their opposition to shared parenting legislation for decades. Do you see how it's exhausting? It must be exhausting. The aforementioned are the typical things that I come across, but the mental gymnastics involved, they're astounding. And the only reason anyone would engage in this kind of pretzelizing of reality, wherein suffering is defined as privilege, and privilege is defined as oppression, is to defend the basic premise that patriarchies privilege men and oppress women. Even without the psychological phenomena of belief perseverance, the sunken costs involved in the feminist endeavor make it next to impossible to shift the momentum. There is too much money and status to lose, too many careers and reputations at stake, and too much potential for embarrassment for the feminist establishment to even so much as consider that they maybe got something so fundamental just a little bit wrong. Can you imagine the level of embarrassment to actually have to admit that your entire life's work is just junk? They're in a position to maintain and promote the patriarchy narrative through media, education, social work, academia, government, and the law. And they will do so to save themselves from embarrassment, to maintain their revenue streams, to some of them because they actually believe it. And given the vagaries of human psychology and what's at stake, they will continue to do so for as long as the public is willing to buy it. And the public is willing to buy it because we humans are naturally gynocentric. We inherently believe women are deserving of our protection, and what feminists tell us only reinforces those feelings. And this brings me to men themselves and how they act as their own worst enemies, at which point I'm going to ask you to compare these images. You can see the male surrounded by the adoring females. He's got a very smug look on his face. He's quite pleased with himself. And the women really are just showering adoration down on him. And I'm not saying that Obama is having sex with any of these women, or that he signed the Lilly Ledbetter Act into law just to get laid. But all of these impulses that we have that help us get laid, they manifest themselves in every aspect of our lives. It's all kind of one big mishmash of survival and reproductive strategies. And our particular brand of egalitarian monogamy, this model that has allowed us to cooperate to this degree, that gives most men a shot at the brass ring of passing on their genes and having a mate for life, that's a relatively new adaptation. And evolution is not an inventor, it's a tinkerer. Humans don't get a total redesign on the factory floor every few generations. All the older stuff that we came from, that's all still there, the stuff up there. It's all still there underneath this new stuff. And what we used to do, how we used to do things, looks more like this. That is what powerful men do. Most of them. There are a few. There are a few who can see through it or who can get around it, or for some reason they don't buy into this. But powerful men, you know it, I know it, everybody knows it. The manifesto of the Conservative Party with its 23 areas of women's disadvantage that they were going to tackle in the last British election, right? And nothing for men. You know, that's what these powerful men, they're just going along with it. We don't do things the way these sea lions do anymore, not in the Western world, but we did them that way for a lot longer than we have been engaging in this grand experiment in social and biological evolution that we call humanity. And the assumption that men in positions of power, alpha males, would privilege all men at the cost of women's oppression defies everything I know about biology, about other species, about the origins of our species, everything. Obama, an alpha male, signed a useless piece of legislation into law to resounding public approval, and yet somehow the proposal presented to him years ago for the creation of a much-needed White House Council on Boys and Men has been tabled. Well, it was tabled essentially for 7 of his 8 years in office. It's just, they literally had a Boy Scout and the head guy in the Boy Scouts standing outside the door of the Oval Office. It was on the agenda. They were going to present him with this proposal. And it got scratched off the agenda, and it has gone down the memory hole, never to return. That is part of who we are as a species. And as much as we might wish it otherwise, this is just where we are. And it's also what puts the lie to the whole feminist model of patriarchy. But at the same time, it's what makes the myth of patriarchy so palatable to people. We're not on the African savannah anymore. The immediate and difficult environmental challenges that necessitated the voluntary investment and cooperation of all males in the success of everyone, those are gone. But the flow of resources is still one way from men to women and children. But because it's no longer voluntary, it no longer requires a reward. Women don't need to reward it, and high-status men don't need to reward it or enforce those rewards. And I understand that, you know, if all of this really turns out to be the case, which I think it is, but I could be wrong, and I would love nothing more than to be wrong, I get how daunting this tangle of challenges is, and how it probably is, you're not very happy with me right now. But our approach to equality or even basic fairness is right now the equivalent of the bloodletting of Ignaz Semmelweis's era. How can we begin to solve the problems of men or women if we're unable to understand or unwilling to acknowledge what's causing them. Feminism's patriarchy theory is the four humors understanding of society. They have systematically bled society in the name of an unproven, unfalsifiable hypothesis that feels very comfortable but is completely bogus. And one of the most ironic reasons they have been able to do this is because they are taking age-old, biologically based intuitions and repackaging them as novel and revolutionary ideas. This is from the 16, maybe, hundreds. It's the men's movement that has been at the forefront of genuinely revolutionary ideas. People call us regressive and accuse us of wanting to turn back the clock to the heyday of the patriarchy, back when all the domestic violence shelters were for men, and it was illegal for women to sexually assault men or something. How were they able to do this? Convince people of this? Because we humans are just animals, after all. We're not perfect, divine beings. We do not hover over the filth and muck of biological reality. We are right there in it, and we are just a product of our evolutionary legacy. We love our narratives, and some narratives we love more than others because they feed our biases. Women are in danger, something must be done. Men are in danger, business as usual. Isn't that what they're for? And as much as I'd love to tell you there's a cure for all of this, I honestly don't think there is. But there is a treatment that might help, and as any doctor could tell you, the first step to successful treatment is admitting that you have a problem. Because this problem is a problem with all of us. Even most of you here, I would bet. And there is a lot of other waking up that needs to happen. There are actually 3 choices in this picture. Not 2, 3. You can take a red pill, you can take a blue one, or you don't have to take any pill at all. And a lot of people in society have chosen not to take either pill. They're just going along until something comes along to motivate them. And a lot of them see what's going on. They just don't care enough to stick their necks out. And that is probably the most difficult challenge of all. Thanks.